AEW All In. And a lot of people are going to talk about the event itself and like the best pay-per-view AEW has ever put on. I'm not going to argue with any of that. You know, it was a good crowd from the camera angles. It didn't look like, people who are big AEW dissers when it comes to the crowd. It looked just fine, right? It looked like a stadium. It looked like WrestleMania, right? If you watch WrestleMania on television or you watch AEW, I mean, it looked like that. And I'm going to give AEW, first off, a ton of credit because the presentation, like the stage itself, right? Because we talk about WWE all the time and how they're cutting back on that stuff. AEW did not cut back. They said you can get in the door for $25 and we're going to put on WrestleMania, Vince McMahon era worthy of pyro and all that good stuff. And they gave you your money's worth. And that's where we kind of want to start because this pay-per-view, now what many consider to be based on the standards, the longest pay-per-view in the history of professional wrestling, beating WrestleMania 35, which was like 5.5 hours long back in 2019. Not talking about the pre-show, which all of us go to. If we got tickets to a show, we go to the pre-show because sometimes matches that are announced that we think are on the pay-per-view are actually on the pre-show, right? A good example of that, right, is here at the podcast. We're going to Slammiversary this weekend for TNA, and some of those matches that I saw announced are on the pre-show. So we'll be in attendance for the pre-show to catch those matches. But not counting the pre-show, this pay-per-view went just shy of 6 hours long.
Yeah.
This pay-per-view took place in a stadium where people pay admission, where people sit in stadium seats, where people eat concession food from a stadium, where people do all the same things they do for a football, basketball, hockey, baseball, whatever it has an event, whether it's a concert or a, seminar or it's a sporting event or whatever. It's all the same things you do when you go to a stadium. And the reason I say that is because no one buys a ticket to go to an event, whether it's a football game or a basketball game, to be at something for this length of time, let alone watching it on television. And I think one of the major things that is an issue with this pay-per-view being so long is just while we can talk about the end matches, the main event matches, great. The last 3 matches, which they called their triple main event, absolutely rewatchable. But, and we talk about this often with WWE and 2-night WrestleMania and 2-night SummerSlam, but it's the same thing. No one is ever going to put on a new wrestling pay-per-view nowadays, whether it's for somebody who's catching up on wrestling or somebody who's never watched wrestling, and just play it like you would a movie. Everything now is going to be fragmented, is going to be segmented, is going to be just watch this match, watch this portion. And I think that's a shame. Because I can tell you what, I watched AEW All In and I watched it in pieces, and I can tell you that I never, from now going forward, will ever watch All In 2025 from start to finish in one sitting. And that's a shame. And I feel like wrestling pay-per-views in general are like that. But what do you make of All In 6 hours long pay-per-view?
Too long. Very, very, very long. I mean, I checked in and checked out throughout the show because there were certain matches that I really wanted to watch, and some matches, I wasn't that like, yeah, I got to sit and watch. So I checked in, I checked out, did some other things, and I caught what I wanted to catch because I did keep an eye on it. On social media, they're kind of let you know what match is coming up, kind of a thing. So I was keeping tabs. So I couldn't sit there for 6 hours and do it. Like it was a good card, it was a good show, and every match that I wanted to watch, I did, and I enjoyed it, and and there was some returns that were good. So overall, like it was a good show. But you just mentioned stadium seats, the whole 9 yards. I don't want to sit in a stadium seat if I'm there for 7 hours. You know what I mean? Like that's a little too long for me.
And, obviously social media, I follow a lot of wrestling social media. It's full of wrestling fans. But I can tell you that one thing that might be unique about this podcast, and maybe it's not, maybe there's others out there, but I can tell you about myself is I am somebody who likes to step in and out of that role as a wrestling fan. Maybe because I became a wrestling fan maybe a little bit later on than some other people. You know what I mean? I kind of looked at it as something that I wasn't interested in kind of growing up, then became interested in it. I also have lots of friends who are not wrestling fans and some who are wrestling fans. So I look at it from all different angles. I put on a lot of different hats when it comes to my love of wrestling. Family doesn't like it. Friends do like it. We both like it, but I have friends who I can do a horror movie podcast or a rock show podcast about who don't like wrestling, right? And I introduce them to things on an often basis. And the problem with that is, regardless of how good this pay per view is for wrestling fans, like, it's just something I would have not wanted to bring somebody with me who wasn't a diehard wrestling fan. I wouldn't have said, "Hey, buddy, you want to go out on Saturday into downtown Dallas or Arlington, if you will, and then go." Tickets are on me. Let's go to this wrestling show, because I have friends who like wrestling shows. I like going to monster trucks. Do I know anything about monster trucks? No. But if it's a Saturday night, I got nothing to do. If someone's got tickets to go see some monster trucks or UFC fighting or demolition derby or rock band that I've never heard of, but I like rock music, sure, I'll go check it out, because everyone likes to be social. It's something you like to do once in a while. You like to explore. You like to get a taste of different things. You put on a TV show every so often that looks like something you may not be that interested in, but you give it a try, right? It's human nature. So I have friends who would go to wrestling shows, who've been to AEW pay-per-views with me, know, kind of a little bit. You got to explain the difference between AEW and WWE and those kind of things, but they're interested in it. But I would have hated bringing them to this, because I would have known that they would have been 4 hours in, ready to go. And I would have been like sitting there feeling bad that I'm like, we got to kind of stay, because, like I said, it's just, I don't understand the purpose. I mean, growing up with pay-per-views and wrestling in general, we, in the 90s, early 2000s, wrestling was 2 hours on Monday, 2 hours on Thursday or Friday. Our pay-per-view was under 3 hours long. And we just, that's how it was. It's a television show. And there's alternative wrestling out there if we want a little bit more of it. But I just don't understand. I mean, 6 hours long. I don't understand when you're putting together a wrestling card and you're putting together the times and it's going to be this long. I just don't understand who this is for. And I know a lot of people put out there, I love it because you get your money's worth. Well, I'm sorry to all those people out there, because your life must suck if you think that you get your money's worth. And the reason I say that is because no one else is putting on 6 hours. So every NFL game you go to sucks. If you go to the Super Bowl, it's going to suck, because it ain't going to be 6 hours long. So I feel bad. You're never going to like anything in life, because no one in the world is doing anything that AEW is doing. And I think that it diminishes it. I can't imagine, even as good as the main events were, if I was been sitting there the whole time, liking them. And I talked to some other people as well who watched Tony Storm and Mercedes Moné, and that was like 2 hours before the main event, and talked about how dead they thought the crowd was, because, again, it's like, it's a hot day in Texas, and you've been here for like 5 hours already since you walked in the door and tailgated before the show. And
there was a particular maneuver that Tony Storm pulled off that made the rounds to not just wrestling fans, but just on social media in general. Yeah, I think you know what I'm saying. I'm not going to go in a deep dive on that one, but you're not wrong. I did watch the match. In the match, the crowd was kind of mild. They popped for a few things, here and there. I thought it was a good match. I think Tony Storm's antics were, Tony Storm-esque, and they are interesting. And some of the stuff she did, not during the match, like press conferences, things like that. That part's all cool, but yeah, I 6 hours of wrestling is just not good for me personally. And I think you and I are on the same page with this one. 3-4 hours, sure. Anything over that, no thanks.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny, because a lot of people out there who are in the know about wrestling, right? Those wrestling websites where we all get a lot of information from, who, whether they know it or they're hearing it, they report on it, right? It's kind of funny, because if you Google, even after All In, if you Google AEW All In length, right? Because you're trying to read, and trying to see exactly how long it was. And because, there's some conflicting reports and adding the pre-show. But just Google All In length if you're curious and you're saying, was it really 6 hours? You'll find some articles that came out about a week prior to All In, a few of them, that actually detailed that this was going to be one of the shorter AEW pay-per-views from their inside knowledge and what they knew was going on, saying
Yes.
that All In had no intention of going anywhere close to Saturday night's main event at 8 o'clock Eastern time and would be over long since then. And it's kind of funny because NXT Great American Bash started at the same time as All In. And the difference between those two is that the NXT Great American Bash ended specifically with enough time to get people to leave one wrestling show, get dinner, drive down the street, and make it to another wrestling show. So essentially, you could attend a full pay-per-view, leave the pay-per-view, drive to another pay-per-view, get a dinner, have dinner, and then make it into your seat before the start of another pay-per-view. While this pay-per-view was going on the entire length of that. In fact, the press from pre-show to press conference, it lasted all the way from 12 o'clock local in Dallas when the pre-show started, all the way until after Saturday night's main event. So if you were maybe like in the parking lot after the show was over or were part of the media and attended the press conferences, you were there for the better part of like 9 hours. And not 9 hours like you were in the building and nothing was going on. Like you were there while like either wrestling was going on, like commentating was going on, post-show was going on, like interviews and press conferences. So you were there for the better part of 9 hours, essentially working. And that's just crazy to me because if I went to a wrestling show at 2 o'clock, I would go, great. All right. You know, what's great about this is I'm going to make some dinner reservations. So going to have a snack here at the concession stands, but have actual dinner later on, not knowing that I would be getting out of there at 8 o'clock at night. And this kind of goes with, with the 2-night WrestleManias and all these kind of things, and where wrestling is just so long. And I don't know why, because again, it's just so strange to me in a time when there's so much to watch and people are watching TikTok and other things in such short periods of time and spans of time, why something like wrestling would be longer nowadays than it was before. Because we're talking baseball, right, is a big thing. They're always trying to shorten up the game. And all these things are trying to find a way to make it shorter. But here, wrestling has never, historically, after All In, has never been longer. And listen, I understand All In is their quote-unquote WrestleMania. It's a big show. I got it. But if you watch WrestleMania 1 in full and then watch WrestleMania 2 in full, back to back, 2 WrestleManias back to back, they are not as long as this one pay-per-view event was. And as you mentioned, you were coming in and out, and I was coming in and out. And listen, I can tell you, if I flew to Texas and I paid $200 for my ticket and I made this my WrestleMania and skipped WrestleMania, skipped SummerSlam, skipped the Royal Rumble, went to this event and wanted to live it to the fullest extent, I still would have been annoyed if it was 6 hours long. I go to WrestleMania. I don't want WrestleMania to be 6 hours long. So it has nothing to do with, well, you didn't go, you didn't spend money on it. I don't think anybody who ever spends money on anything at a stadium or goes to an event is saying, if it's not 6 hours long, I don't think I got my money's worth. I think they're thinking, even when I've gone to concerts and seen my favorite bands, I want to see them play for a long time. But we all have like realistic limits before it's all right. Now you're kind of ruining the show overall. But
I mean, for me personally, like as a concert goer, like like you are, we both like our music. My favorite act, if they go, 2 hours tops, good. I'm good with that. To me, like if they're, especially if they're, they got a lot of hits, they're the main attraction. If they're going like an hour and a half to 2 hours, I'm good. That's fine with me. I don't need them to go for 7 hours. Like that's just a little overdone, And
I think the thing like we've been talking about is like kind of checking in and out. And I know people with music festivals, those are kind of a different animal. But the idea in the music festival is the same thing. People check in and out. And I can tell you, when I grew up watching wrestling, when my friend said, hey, I bought Judgment Day, come over and watch it on Sunday night, I never had the thought of, are we going to watch it and then flip the channel and check in and out? The thought was, from pre-show to the show's over, I am going to be like sitting intently in front of the TV, eyes glued for 3 hours straight. Like, don't want to use the bathroom, don't want to go get a snack, I don't want to miss a thing. And that's how I want wrestling to still be nowadays. It's how I want everything to essentially be. I don't want wrestling to be catering. I don't want Tony Khan to say, I built this pay-per-view for you to like come and go. Like, no, build it like a television show. Build it like you can't miss a thing. I understand we can't watch wrestling every single week, every episode. Maybe we miss episodes here and there. But when it comes to WrestleMania, I don't go to WrestleMania with the intention of like, I'm going to go take off for that match and going to skip that match and going to go look at the souvenir store. I watch it and I plan to watch it with the intent of watching it like a movie, watching it like a football game from start to finish. So I don't want the cards to be structured like that. I just, it's just a shame, you know what I mean? Because again, such a good pay-per-view overall, but it's like talking about, and I watched this recently, you know, people talk about their favorite WrestleManias, and we've talked about this before. It's like WrestleMania, the COVID WrestleMania, right? It's got some good things a part of it. It's got some things that are noteworthy, but it gets lost because of the circumstances of no crowd and COVID era. And that's kind of this, right? Some of this stuff in here could get lost because of just like, I'm not going to go back and rewatch this from start to finish. But talking a little bit about All In when it comes to the content, did anything about All In reinvigorate you as an AEW fan? Because I know it did for a few other people when it comes to, obviously, we've got ourselves a new champion.
Not really. I mean, I've always been a fan, so it's not like, to me personally, I mean, they were all quality matches. Like the matches I wanted to see, like I mentioned, they all delivered. I'm just looking back at the card just to see everything that happened. And again, Okada and Omega, they delivered like I thought they would.
I thought that was crazy in that match, though. I feel like they put on a great match, but again, knowing how AEW is, and maybe because the pay-per-view was so long, they didn't put on as long of a match as they have historically. This wasn't one of their more historically long.
I mean,
the main event was longer than Okada and Omega.
Yeah, I mean, it was 30 minutes, so that's good. That gives me enough to whet my appetite, so to speak. And I got a chance to I've been diving in more because I know you kind of turned me on to Speedball Mike Bailey. So I've been keeping my eye on for anything that he's been up to because you got a good eye for it. So anything that you see that's interesting, I try to lock in on because you and I have very similar tastes in what we're looking for wrestling wise. And you see some of these guys way before I do. So, seeing Speedball Mike Bailey, like that was cool. And I also liked, I think, what was his name? Kevin Knight from, so his teammate Jet Speed, they call him the Jet. So like, I thought they did well. I thought that was a good match. One thing I liked too was I liked Athena. I liked seeing her win. That was cool.
Yeah. Finally she's going to get it. It's been so long. It's crazy because obviously we know her back as like Ember Moon back in the WWE days. And that's one of those ones that kind of like gets lost in the shuffle there because I feel like she's like Fandango or Mr. Kennedy or one of these people who at the time I thought by now, if you would ask me in 2017 or 2018 specifically, I think that's when she made her debut on Raw. If you ask me where you see Ember Moon in 2025, I say if there's a women's match main eventing SummerSlam or WrestleMania, she's in it. And since then, that hasn't obviously been the case. So I'm excited to see her she took a lot of steps backwards when it comes to her public notoriety and her, shoot to the top. But maybe AEW will finally get her to the top where we thought she was going to be at this time by 2025.
Well, speaking of championships, I can't gloss over the fact that Dustin Rhodes, the Natural himself, won a big match this past weekend as well, and he's now the TNT champion. After the vacation of it, so to speak, that was unfortunate with Adam Cole's injury and everything, and that's the other thing too. He spoke. It really sounded like a typical wrestling retirement. So I hope it's not a final retirement, so to speak, because Adam Cole, he's I think he's literally my age. I know you're a couple years older than me, so he's literally like in his mid to late 30s. So like in wrestling terms, like you're just getting to the high point of your game, because when you hit your early 40s, that to me is like peak wrestling. I feel like for a lot of guys and gals. So
or Dustin Rhodes, who's 56, who's now the champion, right?
That's the thing. Like, I mean, good for him. Like he looked good. I mean, it was, I introduced, my daughter to AEW a little bit more as of lately, because, she wants to, she's becoming a wrestling fan. So I'm like, well, I want to show you some other stuff. So we watched All In and I showed her this match and I'm like, she's like, and the first thing she said to me was, "Is that Cody Rhodes?" And I was like, "No, no, no, honey. That's Dustin Rhodes. That's Big Brother." Oh, I like him. And then when he won the match, she was very excited. So it was a cool moment, for her because she's like, "Oh, I get to watch two brothers in two different shows, win championships." So I thought that was cool. And then the whole Adam Cole thing, obviously we both wish him the best. Obviously that bump he took, I think it was outside the ring where he got hit. He hit his head and neck a little weird on the outside, like the outside of the ring. So that wasn't, that was an unfortunate situation. So hopefully we get him back at some point.
Yeah, he'll probably be out for a little bit. A tough day when it comes to main stars and injuries. And we'll move on later on and talk about obviously the WWE side of things. But All In, I mean, I think All In, I guess I'm one of those kind of people, and where and WWE does it now sort of with their pay-per-views. They're still long, but where they just kind of give you some, like, let's say the Royal Rumble, right? What was it? 4 matches. I think All In would have been great if you just took matches 7 through 12, or you know what I mean, and called it a day, right? I understand that, you want to see, the Death Riders, the tag team version of them, and MJF winning the gauntlet as well, and Athena. But, I feel like, we could have just had some of the main match, or at least things like, the tag team match you were just talking about briefly with Speedball Mike Bailey and like the Hurt Syndicate. That almost went 20 minutes long. There's nothing on the card that went less than 15 minutes long, which is crazy to me. And that's why this pay-per-view lasted as long as it did. And the longest match of the night was the main event. What do you make of Hangman Adam Page and Jon Moxley in their Texas death match? It's definitely something that we're not going to see in WWE. It was like the WrestleMania 40 main event with all the callbacks, but in a much more obviously bloody way.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, in typical Jon Moxley fashion. I mean, it's the match itself, it was what I expected it to be. A lot of blood and guts, so to speak, and there was some returns and all that. Like I'm not the biggest fan of these matches all the time, and it's like a staple. I know it's like Jon Moxley's thing. Like it's everyone's got their own taste of it. Like I don't mind it here and there. But why does every Jon Moxley, like whatever he's doing, it has to do with this? Like it's to me, like it turns me off from what otherwise was a pretty good match. I thought it was, and I obviously liked the finish because I wanted to see AEW not be held hostage by the Death Riders anymore. Like it was just one of those things where I'm over it and I'm ready to see them move on. Move in a different direction. So overall,
very similar. Do you think that AEW thought of the Death Riders, specifically Jon Moxley, as their version of Roman Reigns?
If they did, that was very, I guess, nearsighted. I guess
that's how essentially the Death Riders finally were defeated when like everyone comes back. Essentially, obviously, we remember, Seth Rollins, John Cena, The Undertaker, you know what I mean? So, like, the same situation with Bryan Danielson, Darby Allin, Swerve Strickland, everybody coming out to assist Hangman Adam Page along the way.
It was all hands on deck, really.
Yeah, the Young Bucks coming out, you know what I mean? Even though they're not even really part of the Death Rider stuff. So it was, like I said, all hands on deck, and that's it's similar to what we saw at WrestleMania 40, doing the same thing to dethrone Jon Moxley the same way that Roman Reigns got dethroned. That's why it just has so many similarities in that main event. But I mean, I'll give it up for AEW All in regard to presentation wise. It looks like they're the number 2 company for sure. They put on a show that looks like WrestleMania. It's hard because WrestleMania is clearly WrestleMania, but like AEW, they say things like, well, this is our WrestleMania. Well, since when? I thought Double or Nothing was your WrestleMania, right? You know what I mean? I thought before you brought back All In, All Out might have been your WrestleMania. So it's like hard to decipher of like, okay, this is your WrestleMania. kind of thing. I mean, TNA can obviously be kind of accountable for that as well because Bound for Glory is their WrestleMania. But in many years, they've treated Slammiversary, which is the actual anniversary of the company. That's why it's called Slammiversary, which would make more sense for it to be their bigger show because it's more symbolic than just a created show out of nothing.
Let's be honest, not to get on that tangent too much right now, but Slammiversary is being built pretty well right now. We'll just say that.
Well, it's just and they're advertising it specifically as their biggest show ever, right? But then they say that Bound for Glory is their WrestleMania. So I get it that All In has been in stadiums lately versus like Double or Nothing has not been. But I guess it's like, why is this your WrestleMania? Why is this your biggest show? Just because you say it is? Like, I'm more conditioned to think that Double or Nothing should be the WrestleMania based on its significance of being the first pay-per-view, based on that, that annual tradition as the All In came about in the AEW sense a couple of years later. Yeah. But it will be returning to Wembley Stadium next year. It will be at the end of August next year. So very curious to see. And let me tell you, as somebody who is curious, and I've put it on my radar, of maybe attending it next year because I, always wanted to attend a show at Wembley Stadium. I feel like obviously attending AEW would be a more affordable form of doing that than WWE, which they're clearly not doing, and they're doing what they're doing. So I thought about, attending All In. I kind of wish I did that a couple years ago when I went there for Money in the Bank, because again, it would have been a more affordable ticket to do and stuff like that. But I can even say this, even if I am to go next year and I am to attend All In, I don't want it to be 6 hours. I'll fly 6 hours.
Don't get your hopes up.
Yeah. I'll fly the 6 hours to London, right? And all that stuff. But I don't want it to be 6 hours. There's just nothing about going to anything that is that when you're with people, you feel bad for the people you're with if they're not as diehard as you are. And frankly, I don't know if I'm as diehard as that. So if I'm not as diehard as that, and I'm with people who are not as diehard as that, you feel kind of like a guilt.
Let's be honest. If you're not as diehard as that, then that should tell you everything you need to know about it, because you're a diehard fan. And
I'm not a diehard AEW fan. I wouldn't say that. I'd say I'm more of the WWE for sure.
But you're a diehard wrestling fan. You know what I mean? Like, that's like, if you're a diehard wrestling fan and you're kind of like almost like get to that burnt out point, that tells you everything you need to know about what the majority of the wrestling fandom
what the people you just bring along with, who say, sure, you're going to buy my ticket, I can come along, should be a good time. You know what? So people who like me like to share the things that I like. You know what I mean? It's kind of a camaraderie. But even they're like, why did you bring me to this? And when it gets to that length, right? Nobody likes that. I brought a friend to AEW Full Gear. And I can tell you he enjoyed it up until from 7 o'clock right up until about 10:30. And at that point, and that's the main event right there. But even at that point, it's hard for him to comprehend and put his full attention on it, because he's just going, we still have more matches. This isn't over yet, kind of thing. So AEW All In, they're AEW's most successful pay-per-view, I would say. But that's obviously a big nitpick to me in the length of time, which I'm not saying AEW, it's bad if you're 6 hours. I'm saying WWE, if you put on a 6 hour pay-per-view, don't do it. The NFL, if you want to add a fifth quarter to the Super Bowl, don't do it. Like, nobody is asking for any of the stuff. That's why we like it to begin with. We all fell in love with wrestling before pay-per-views were 6 hours long. We're not becoming more fans because of it being longer. It only just kind of, like I said, drains you a little bit.